Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great on this beautiful sunny day here in Hampton. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will be talking about the new moon on August 14th at 10:54 a.m. And the two luminaries will be sandwiched between Venus and Mars and Leo, another stellium. Venus will be retrograde, backing away from a square to Saturn, but will be applying a trine to Uranus. Let's talk about some spontaneity in our relationship. Mercury will be in Virgo and tenanting the 11th house. Good time for details and understanding our unique talent. Swami will explain about the new celestial positioning system he has developed using transits to assist in tasks. So, Swami, it looks like we have 4 planets in Leo. So can you give our listeners a clue as to what that all means and what we should do with it?
Well, I think anytime you have something that's lumped up like that, it kind of brings a certain sense of a point of emphasis on something. And one of the things that we always talk about, especially in Kriya Yoga, is that Leo is associated with the virtue of loyalty. And so I think a good thing to do would maybe just really kind of try and understand what exactly is loyalty. What does that mean to me, to be loyal? Because Leo rules the cardiovascular system, and the whole sense of something when something is heartfelt and associated with the part of our anatomy that actually supplies nourishment to the rest of everything. Because I always think about the sun. The sun rules Leo. And one of the things you always notice is that when the sun is shining, we don't see anything else. So it really takes precedence over everything. And so in our approach to astrology, Leo is all about the incentive to express the self, which is the self with a capital S, self-realization. And so with a configuration like that, when you match it with a metaphysical or a mystical system, then this new moon would be a really good time for you to really focus on your connection to your divinity.
Should we apply that sense of loyalty to our divinity? Is that where the importance comes into play? I mean, I would imagine if we don't have loyalty to our divinity, how can we express loyalty to any one person, place, or thing?
Yeah, that's exactly the way that it works. In fact, that's one of the things that we say in Kriya Yoga, that your primary relationship should be with your divinity. In fact, that's the thing that starts the whole thing up. Even, say, for example, when we had that one show and we talked about sex out of marriage is a sin. And one of the things that we said there was that it was like trying to cut a tree down with a chainsaw without starting it up. And, of course, we told a joke about a guy that went into a department store and bought a chainsaw and brought it home and brought it back and said it wasn't working. And, of course, the butt of the joke was that he didn't start it up. So, but when you say sex out of marriage is a sin, nobody's really laughing. So again, we don't really understand the importance of this primary relationship with our divinity. In fact, one of the things we actually mentioned it in other shows, but I really like what C.S. Lewis said about perfect love. The whole thing that perfect love casts out fear, but so do a lot of other things. Ignorance, alcohol, passion, presumption, and stupidity. It is very desirable that we should all advance to that perfection of love in which we shall fear no longer. But it is very undesirable until we have reached that stage that we should allow any inferior agent to cast out fear. So to me, that's the whole thing of the concept of false gods, and that this whole thing of loyalty has to be understood as you're making a choice between different resources, is the way that I try and explain it. It's like this relationship with the divine is mutually exclusive. And it's not like God doesn't want us to have it some other way. It's just this is the physics of spirituality. That if we draw from duality, fear, and limitation, it has a specific return. If you draw from truth and wholeness, it has a different return. And so this concept of loyalty to one's divinity becomes a very desirable condition because of all of the benefits that come with it, really.
I was just thinking that I have said to my sales staff in the past that customers are not loyal. So now, after hearing you talk about that, now I'm wondering if that is a message for me to understand that maybe I have to work on my loyalty, because as you say, what surrounds us is within us. So by my saying to a sales force that you have to build a relationship with your customers, because they're, generally speaking, they're not loyal. They'll go wherever they can get the best deal, so to speak. So now I'm thinking what I just said is that maybe I'm thinking about it all wrong. Maybe it's got to come from me first, and then, or from them first, and then from there, then we can start building loyalty with people that surround us. Does that make sense?
Well, again, to me it does, because, again, it all comes back to my primary relationship with my divinity, which makes me a completely different entity. And it's one of the things that we always say. I mean, the problem with the world today is not God's love for humanity. Like we are all equally divine. The problem with the world is humanity's love for God. Like we don't know what it looks like when we desire this void or this nothing. We're still attached to the physical world. Now, one of the first things that happens with this internal connection is your exchange of energy with the outside world is different, that you're no longer drawing off of it. I think what happens is a lot of times we draw from the outside world, and say, for example, just like what you said, getting sales becomes the goal. And if you don't get the sale, then of course you feel disappointed. And depending on, because on some deep psychological level, this is how I validate myself. I'm a great salesperson because I made such X amount of sales. In the yoga model, your sense of self is totally established by a relationship with the forces that are really important to you. So whether you make the sale or you don't make the sale, your sense of self is not inflated, nor is it deflated. That you who you are remains totally intact. You have distance, And so from that vantage point, you're not drawing off of the outside world. You're not drawing from a limited source of sustenance. So this loyalty, this relationship that you have with the divine doesn't negate what's going on in the outside world. It makes it much smaller. Then you have the benefit of internal support. Now, another thing that kind of happens with that is that there is a sense of calmness, confidence, and there's clarity that comes with that. So that in the event that if somebody doesn't buy what it is that you're selling, you're not deflated by that. And that's an interesting dynamic, because one of the things that you always hear in conversations is animals sense fear. And so, say, for example, even independent of what it is that you're selling, if the person senses that you are needy of this sale, it has an effect on that exchange of energy. Whereas if you have this sense of confidence, then whatever it is that you're selling has a different inner dynamic to the person that you are trying to sell, if that makes any sense to you.
It does. And it's funny you say it, because I have actually cautioned my sales staff exactly like that. No matter what you do or say, always have this appearance that you're confident. Speak with a sense of confidence. I wanted to ask you a question about, in our summary we talked about the retrograde of Venus, and we said that it's backing away from a square to Saturn, but we'll be applying a trine to Uranus. Now, what are the dynamics behind that, and how should we, what should our awareness be regarding those?
Well, the square by aspect is usually something that is a little bit more challenging, and the trine is a much more favorable aspect. So as far as the outcome, that's something that's going to be very individual. But typically, even, say, for example, something that may be more challenging under a trine will have a less of a traumatic impact on you, even though it's the exact same thing. You might internalize it differently. It will soften it to a certain extent. And so there's nothing wrong with aspects of Venus to Saturn. That's how we put things into form. Now, during a square, it just might be a little bit more of a bumpier ride.
I'm all set with that. Bring it on. I have the confidence to get through that, I guess. I wonder if we should start talking about, we'll talk about it after the break. I want to talk about fear again, if we can do that after the break. So we'll pause for a moment, listeners, to hear a word from our sponsors. We'll be back with you shortly.
If you are looking for a samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Kriya Yoga Series 1 live classes and videos. Get your arms around the spiritual science of Kriya Yoga.
The intention of why we practice is to embody spirit, to feel connected to the life force.
Kriya Yoga Asana live classes and videos. A cosmically engineered system of exercises to initiate apotheosis. A system of exercises engineered for dining and dancing at the Cosmic Ballroom. Kriya Yoga Series 2 live classes and videos. A a practice in open form designed to facilitate positive growth of consciousness. Get your Labyrinth video.
I find the positive side of it is it pulls a lot of things together.
Kriya Yoga mantra and meditation. With repetition comes absorption. Pray on prana and become divine.
At the same time, we all have a unique talent and gift to give back to the universe.
Private session. The mysteries of the universe have always been handed down verbally from teacher to student. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, last week I had mentioned a quote, and it was something to the effect of fear and faith are the same thing, but faith goes in one direction and fear is in the opposite direction. So fear is faith in the wrong direction. And we talked a little bit about it this morning. Can you give us your take on that?
Yeah, it's kind of like what I had said earlier, that the whole thing of, when we are moving towards this experience of perfect love, it is very undesirable that we should allow any inferior agent to take fear away. And one of the reasons for that is because conditioning, that our bodies are they are programmed in a way that now that they will continuously go to that inferior agent to find the desired state. And that's what keeps us stuck in this regressive pattern. And, when you read scriptures, there's only one truth, there's only one God, there's really only one number one need. There's only one way that this whole thing goes right. And so if you have the wrong symbol producing the right feeling, then nothing really happens. So the whole intention of this is to get the right symbol to produce the right feeling. And that, I think, is an important thing about this new moon coming up, especially with this stellium in the 10th house, which has a lot to do with our dharma. 10th house is you before the general public, and we all have a collective purpose. And then, like we had said in the opening of the show, that Mercury is in Virgo and it's in the 11th house, which is the house of your unique talent. So a big part of this new moon is trying to figure out, who am I and what is it that I do better than anybody else? Because we all have a unique talent. There's something each and every one of us does better than anybody else. But a big part of this discovery is we have to individuate. We have to become an individual. And it is our connection to this life force, to this unified field, that enables us to do that. In fact, it's the only way that will happen.
I know that seems to be a struggle with a lot of people, and that is trying to discover what their unique talent is. And that might just be a good segue into our program for next week about discovery. But so if they were to concentrate on that this week, what would your advice be for them to try to discover this hidden potential of themselves?
Well, one of the exercises that we always do is you want to sit down and you want to go through your chart, go through each house, and ask yourself, what would my life look like if I was doing exactly what I want to be doing? And one of the things that we say is to be very specific as you go through that. Your physical body, how much money would you have? So you don't want to just say, I want a lot of money, or I love the Lily Tomlin. You know, where she said, my whole life I always dreamed I wanted to be somebody. Now I wish I had been a little more specific, which I've always loved that. But to actually be specific as to what would your life look like if you were doing exactly what you want to be doing. And be creative, be imaginative, try not to let anything really undermine this vision of yours. And then once you have gone through each house, then continue to ask for what you want. But the most important thing, and usually the thing that is missing in most of our endeavors, is this primary relationship with our divinity. That most of us are embroiled in the physical world, and we're trying to do this when we're disconnected from this resource that brings what was commonly referred to as God's help. Mm-hmm. And again, trying to do it without this inner connection is like trying to cut a tree down with a chainsaw without starting it up.
So there are a lot of challenges that people face, you know, whether they're trying to discover themselves or they're trying to get past pain in their body, for example. So if they go through each house, say it's just pain in their body that they're trying to overcome, and how can they go through each house in relationship to that particular pain that they may have in their body? What would they do? Because would we associate pain in the body to maybe being a part of these houses?
Well, to answer your question, sure, it's all relative. And, you know, when you start unpacking things like that, it's not quite as easy as you might think. You know, it's like if you, I don't know, for a lack of better, if you made a cake and all of a sudden you decided that you weren't going to eat eggs anymore. Well, after you've baked the cake, you can't just take the eggs out. So how do we go about making changes like that is you're going to have to start with a new recipe, and maybe if you can, that's where I think, you know, things like the celestial positioning system that we've kind of organized here can be somewhat helpful because it will give you a template. Also things like the labyrinth. If you're using the labyrinth on a regular basis, you've got a template where you're visiting all of the different facets of your mind, and you're constantly programming things with new imagery. And if you do start to get some debilitating thoughts or unconscious patterns or karmic patterns that are manifesting, then you've got a better chance of dissolving them if you have these tools in place, if you're working with the relationship between what's going on in your body and what's going on in your mind.
Well, thanks for answering that. That does make a lot of sense. So basically it's the practice that we have to do every day. This consistent practice can bring about the results that people might need. Now, I was thinking, and from reading your notes, and in your notes you say that people have this fear of death. But I think people also have, and you said this in your notes too, that people also have this fear of life. And I think that is so profound. And I think people really can be afraid of actually living. And on the other hand, I asked somebody how they were doing the other day, and I said, how's life? And they said, oh, I'm just living the dream. And I was like, well, what does that really even mean? So I thought that was interesting. You had in your notes that, we had this complementary other half of fear of life, and that's fear of death.
Yeah, and well, that's the whole thing of you can't manifest one without the complementary unmanifested other part. And so that's just for every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. That's just the laws of physics. But I think like you said, this fear of life, this fear of growth is an interesting dynamic because it's one of the biggest obstacles that people encounter when they hear information like what we have. That, we have a fear of death and we're all bound up in the body, but this fear of growing psychologically and spiritually is equally as traumatic. And leaving what's safe, familiar, comfortable, and known and embarking on the anxiety, the uncertainty of the unknown can be immobilizing to a lot of people. But one of the things that you will start to see is that if you take the step-by-step approach of Kriya Yoga, you'll start to see that the system actually has the solution built in it. And it's the whole thing of internal support. When all of a sudden now you separate from your attachment to things that are producing fear, and you will attach yourself to something that is producing growth and life, that the changes will start to reveal themselves almost immediately. And then with that comes this calmness, this stillness, this confidence, that you actually become spirit, you become divine. And that's the like attracts like. Now all of a sudden this is what you desire, this is what you are drawn to, as opposed to the outside world.
You had mentioned earlier about the celestial positioning system that you have developed. Can you let our listeners know how they can access that and how they actually use this information from the website? And I think it's absolutely fabulous. I went on it last night. I think it's really very cool. And I think it's another great tool for us to use to help us in our development.
Well, yeah, you can get that from the website. The website now has different memberships that you can join. You can actually sign up for your classes there if you wanted to do the monthly membership, and you would get the premium content that is now on the website, and also the astrological celestial positioning system, which is basically just some insights into each day, as far as what transits will be available to us, transit to transit, where the planets are, to give us some insight into the biosphere of energy. And in our programs, that's what we're learning how to do, is how to utilize that.
Thank you. I think what I'm going to start doing is maybe reading the day before. Like today's obviously Monday, so tonight I'll read Tuesdays so I can kind of figure out how am I going to plan my day for the next day.
Yeah, and the thing is that you also want to keep a journal. Journaling is really a helpful tool, especially if you are looking at some of the things that we're posting, which includes things like eclipses, something that's on a 2-year, 2-month, and 28-day cycle. So that you can go back 2 years from now and you can look and see what was happening that day. And that gives you a point of cross-reference. And then coming back to the whole thing of memberships, you can also be what's called a VIP member, where you can just get the premium content on the website and the astrological posts, or you can just join for astrological posts and they're all priced differently.
Perfect. Well, I think it's time to close down our show. So I'd like to thank you, listeners, for tuning in today to the Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.